They had just announced that George Lucas was going to make Star Wars prequels. And I decided that I would make a fake Star Wars prequels rumor site. I said that the first one was going to be about Anakin Skywalker's 10th birthday party, and that there was a race of squirrel-like creatures called the Trinkies.
Welcome to Log Off. Everyone has an internet story to tell, and today we're getting Connor Ratliff's. Connor is a comedian and actor with serious internet credentials. His podcast, Dead Eyes, ran for just over 30 episodes and is cemented as one of the format's highest and most unique achievements. He's also an incredible improviser and the host of the popular live talk show, The George Lucas Talk Show, which raised a ton of money during the pandemic by pivoting to live streams. The show is also the subject of a recent documentary. I'm excited to talk to him about all that. But first, Connor, let's start this podcast the way we always do. At the beginning, what is your earliest internet memory?
My earliest internet memory is going into my dad's office and seeking out something that was then called the Elvis Costello homepage. And it was basically a fan site where someone had a discography, they had a gigography, and they had a press section that was like a bunch of scanned or mostly just retyped, I think, articles, interviews, things like that. And I would just print off articles and interviews that I hadn't read on my dad's work computer. I remember it was very slow, and anything that was involving like a picture, it would load and you'd wait and wait and wait. You'd wait. Even if it was just a long article, you just wait for the next page and the next page. And that's my first vivid memory. I think there was a point maybe where I'd gone into like a computer lab. This would have been like freshman year of college, and tried to figure out news groups. Like alt fan things like, and being bewildered, feeling like I don't understand the way these work. I don't understand how to find what I want. So that's the first like two things I remember from the internet.
Yeah, that seems like for our age, it's kind of what it was, like a lot of pulling in text things, trying to dive into fandoms, stuff like that. Do you remember when you first started actually making things that might appear on the internet?
Yeah. It was actually, so that would have been, 93, 94 ish when I went to the University of Missouri, Columbia for 2 years. And then I moved to England. I moved to Liverpool, England, and I went to drama school. And there was an internet cafe that I would go to check my email, because it was a new school. And that first year they did not have everything up and running, and they didn't have internet that you could access very conveniently at the school. And so I would walk to the far end of the city center in Liverpool, where I found an internet cafe where I would get like a chocolate muffin, and I would check my email like once a week. And it was frantic and expensive and slow. I remember it was one of those things where it was going to cost me like £5 for a half hour of internet. And during that time, I would just be getting, anything that anyone had emailed me over the course of the week. And I subscribed at that point to an Elvis Costello fan mailing list. So a lot of my emails would just be sorting through what do I need to read? What do I need to trash? And it was never relaxing, because every now and then I would have to splurge and get like an hour of internet. But it always felt like there wasn't enough time. I remember the impatience of like everything taking a little too long, and I was paying, I could feel the minutes ticking away. And then my second year at school there, we started having internet access at the school. And I did a project for a class where they were talking about, there was a project that had to do with like design a website for yourself to promote yourself as an actor. And to do that, you had to learn how to basically, I was designing web pages in Netscape Navigator, which was a web browser, but it also had an editor feature where you could. And so I was learning how to do that in a very basic way. And there's actually an episode of Dead Eyes that goes into this first thing that I remember making for the internet, which is they had just announced that George Lucas was going to make Star Wars prequels. It was like the special editions were coming out in theaters where he'd added and cleaned up the effects and added some things that he wanted to add into the original 3 movies. And they announced he was going to be making the Star Wars prequels. And I decided that I would make a fake Star Wars prequels rumor site. And I didn't want it to be in my name. So I made up a character. And the character that I made up was this guy who was eventually sort of became, because I would make up fake rumors about, hey, I heard this is going to happen. Here's some potential titles. I said that the first one was going to be about Anakin Skywalker's 10th birthday party. And that there was a race of squirrel-like creatures called the Trinkies who were at first were going to like ruin his birthday party, but then they'd all become friends. And I started getting like hate mail from Star Wars fans who were like, this site's bullshit. It's not true. You're making this up. I thought it was really obvious it was made up. But I started changing the character of the character I created for the website to reflect what I thought was a really mean-spirited kind of fan base. And so I started making him kind of like, this wasn't the term for it back then. I don't even know what we called it, but now you'd say this is a toxic, Star Wars fan. And the name that I came up, I just want to come up with what I thought was just like a very generic sort of name. So I named the character Ryan Johnson, spelled Ryan, not spelled Rian.
Okay.
But I then I wrote a feature film that was about these 2 best friends who had this sort of toxic friendship. Basically, it was 2 friends who should have stopped being friends in junior high, but now they were adults. And one of them was like a lonely nerd who lives with his parents. And the other one, the one who I played, the Ryan Johnson character, was like an angry, married Star Wars fan who was obsessed with Star Wars in a very unhealthy and unhappy way. He was like married with kids. And that character's name was Ryan Johnson. And a few years later, when Ryan Johnson, the filmmaker, I remember when the movie Brick came out, and I was like, oh, written and directed by a guy named Ryan Johnson. Oh, it's spelled different. I'm like, that's funny. And then there was a point where, he made Looper, he made the Brothers Bloom. I was like, oh, this guy's like a major filmmaker. He was directing episodes of Breaking Bad. And I thought that was sort of crazy enough. It was truly so crazy when eventually he became like the first person since George Lucas to write and direct a Star Wars film. And I'm like, this is fully sort of eating its own tail in terms of this weird little, it was truly just a website for a class just to learn how to make a website. But I got a lot of the rumors printed back when this thing felt fun and not like, now it feels like misinformation on the internet. There's nothing really fun about it anymore. But back then it just felt, it felt like a funny thing to make up harmless rumors and then get them printed in articles about like, here's what people are saying about the Star Wars prequels.
I assume that website does not exist. Have you tried going back to Internet Archive to see if you could unearth some of
you can find it on the Wayback Machine. It's there. The idea that anyone with an internet connection could see it the second you published it was almost like terrifying, And the fact that it was, that was still in the days when Yahoo was the main way you would look for things. And it was not a search engine. It was a curated listing. It was a catalog because there were so few websites. And so my site was one of the first sites that if you looked up Star Wars prequels, it would be there along with like the force.net and just the handful of big sites.
So now, people coming up now as performers, they have the internet obviously like right in their crosshairs, if not like their primary option. I'm just curious at what point you realized that like that was something you should consider giving real time and effort to.
In the early days, it was sort of hard to figure out what the utility of it would be because at the time when I was probably most primed to just like make something and put it out there, video wasn't really like putting up I wouldn't even have known how to put up a real time, like a real player video and get it to run. And it would have, it's just like people weren't watching video stuff. And it's also one of those things that by the time you had YouTube and things like that, it was sort of felt like, well, everybody's doing it now. So it kind of, the classic sort of dilemma with the age we live in is that there's no gatekeepers, but it's also like anybody who wants to can put whatever they want on the internet, but good luck getting anybody to see it because it's literally competing with everything else in the world. So that was kind of the thing that I was very lucky about, even with Dead Eyes, was that it managed to get attention at a time when, doing a podcast is, I've spent the past 2 years doing this comedy podcast that part of the premise of it has unfortunately come true, which is that if you want to keep something a secret, put out a podcast about it, because getting people to give any amount of their attention to something is it's a flooded market. And I feel like there's always the people who get in on something before everybody else does, that they establish kind of a foothold and they become these like titans of whatever form that is, If you can figure out what the next thing is before everybody knows it's there,
Yeah, like the Vine kids who jumped on that early and now are billionaires.
Yeah. Yeah, but also it's one of those things where like you can jump on something like Vine and become a master of it, and then you never know when the form that you're jumping on is going to just vanish, Mm-hmm. There were some people that I felt like Vine was like the perfect format for them in a way that even like TikTok isn't quite the same. Every kind of new form is sort of a different thing, You
got to keep evolving too. Once you hit one of those, you have to be ready for the next platform.
I mean, the podcast I've been doing the past couple of years, which now sort of doesn't have a home, is Tiny Dinos.
My friend James III and I, James III was part of Astronomy Club, if people are familiar with that Netflix comedy series.
And we did this comedy podcast, Hyperobject Industries, which is Adam McKay's company. One of my Dead Eyes producers was working there, and he said, "Hey, I have a budget to do a comedy podcast. Do you have any ideas?" And so we did this podcast about two best friends who are scientists who bring back dinosaurs, but they bring them back very small so they won't have any Jurassic Park style problems. And things start going wrong almost immediately. Part of the comedic premise of the podcast is that we're trying to keep the tiny dinos a secret, but we're also doing a podcast about them. And my character, who's sort of the more reckless of the two scientists, posits that podcasting is such a niche form that as long as we only have listeners who can keep a secret, then we'll be fine. Unfortunately, that's proven to be somewhat true in the sense that the day that our podcast was announced, that its first season was announced on Deadline, was also the same day that Hyperobject Industries pivoted out of making podcasts. So they honored our contract to make 2 seasons of the podcast, but we've sort of done it out in this void where we didn't really have like institutional support other than actually making a good comedy podcast. We didn't have any like marketing or any ad sales or any of the things that would typically help get your, I think we've had one person review it officially, and they named it as one of the funniest podcasts of 2024, but none of them, other than that, nobody has reviewed the podcast. And it's been right now we're like we're on hiatus, looking for a home for it, trying to find like, do we do more seasons of it? Do we do specials? It's the exciting thing is that you can make stuff in this world. The frustrating thing is that you are competing with not only every new thing that exists, but you're also competing with, we live in this very unique moment in that right now, this very second, if I wanted to stop talking to you and watch Casablanca, I could do it in less than 30 seconds, pressing 5 buttons on the device I'm holding in my hand, which
that wasn't true in 1985. Like if I wanted to
Right.
stop talking to you and watch Casablanca, I'd have to go find a VCR or a TV station that was playing it or a movie. Like, whereas now you can kind of do anything you want any time of day, media wise as an audience member.
Yeah, that's a great point. If this podcast had come out 5 to 10 years ago, just the guests you're getting alone would have stood this thing up, it seems like.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things. The hopeful thing is we've done 20 really funny episodes and they're there for people to discover. And we're not on a, it's our idea. We're not on a time clock. We can stop doing it for 2 years. And if people in the meantime discover it and it becomes even moderately popular, we can make more at that point. It's not like we have to rebuild the sets or anything, That's always the thing you feel like when like a TV show ends and there's like a fan movement for it to keep going. And then there's that point where they're like, we've released the actors from their contracts and they're taking down the sets. And that's the point where you're like, oh, well now like it's not gonna get picked up by somebody else because they're taking apart those sets, That's when you really, whereas with the podcast, that's the fortunate thing is like, you just got to find the place to record it,
Yeah, definitely. So let's get into Dead Eyes. I thought about describing the concept in the intro, but I will not do it proper justice. Can you talk about A, the concept, and B, where the name comes from? Because it's pretty great.
Yeah, Dead Eyes is a podcast that I did a few years back. And it was an idea that I've been pitching for a while. Anytime I'd have a meeting with a podcast network and then, come in with 5 or 10 ideas. And it was always the one that I would kind of get excited about and people would be into it, but then they would be like, no, we don't, that's funny. But people thought it would only be like a 3-episode thing or whatever. And I'd run out of ideas. And it's based on a real thing that happened to me, which was when I was a young actor, fresh out of drama school. I was cast in a small speaking role in the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. And I found out that Tom Hanks, who was executive producer of the series, was going to be directing the episode I was cast in. So I'm very, very excited about this. It feels like my career is getting started. And then the day before I was supposed to film my scenes, I was getting ready to, I was living in Liverpool, getting ready to go down to London to stay for the week and film my stuff. And the day before I was supposed to film, I got a frantic phone call from someone in my agent's office saying, you need to go down to London immediately and re-audition in person for Tom Hanks. He has looked at your audition tape and he's having second thoughts. He thinks you have dead eyes. And so I had this in the first episode, I sort of do a blow by blow account of what happened that day and how I went and auditioned in a little room for Tom Hanks for a part that was very small. There was not a lot of dialogue, it's not a part where you can really strut your stuff. It's not a part that is designed to impress. It's a very functional, supporting part, playing an orderly who brings the coffee, goes and, puts some papers on a desk. And so I did the re-audition for the part I'd already been cast. My costume was ready. They had cut my hair to World War II military specifications. But then it was decided that I would be not in Band of Brothers. I was fired like 5 minutes after I did the re-audition. And it was devastating to me because I'd got my hopes up. I had very stupidly told everyone I knew that I was going to be working with Tom Hanks. I was going to do this. And, it was that and a bunch of other setbacks sort of made me quit acting for a long time. Eventually, I found my way back to it because I got into doing improv at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater about a decade later. And even then, I wasn't thinking of getting back into professional acting. I was just doing that because it was fun. And by the time I was doing the podcast, this story had become just a fun kind of icebreaker because people would be like, people that I would meet. I remember the first time I was doing like a UCB touring show, and it was with 2 veteran improvisers that I had been watching in shows at UCB. It was who I'm now friends with, Darcy Carden and Brandon Scott Jones. I remember they were among the first people that they were like, so where are you like from? Like, how did you
find UCB. What have you been doing? I was like, well, I used to be an actor, but then I got fired by Tom Hanks and for having dead eyes. And it was just like a really funny story, a way to introduce yourself, as that sort of explained like why I was this like 33-year-old man who was just now starting to do improv, you know, because I was good at it. And people were like, where have you been? Like, why didn't we, you know, there was sort of that thing of like, what have you been doing up to now? Did you just start like acting? And so by the time I did the podcast, you know, there were some people who they hear the premise and their immediate reaction is like, oh my God, get over it. Like, who cares? It's sort of because they think it's going to be an actor whining about how it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. And there's certainly a touch of that to it. But I think the reason I thought it would be a good podcast is because stuff like this happens all the time to everybody. People deal with disappointments every day, and they're interesting. It's interesting what we get our hopes up about, what we do when things don't go our way. And I thought, wouldn't this be, it's such a small, essentially victimless story. I was still paid. I would have given up the money to do the show at the time because the work was more important to me than the money. But some people are like, you got paid. What are you complaining about? Well, because I got paid and I have no credit. I have nothing that can help me build a resume. You know, there's so many things about particularly when you're starting out, that you're trying to build up, you know, a CV of work that people can look at and be like, oh, this person was in Band of Brothers. What better credit could you have than that? And saying you got fired from Band of Brothers, although it's worked out well for me given the podcast, at the time is not a useful credit, where I'm like, well, I was supposed to be in Band of Brothers, but I was fired by one of the most beloved figures in show business. But by the time I was developing it as a podcast idea, it was really just a fun way to use like the sort of the seriousness of the true crime sort of genre, the trying to solve a mystery. To me, that was fun. And it was also confusing to people because I think some people were sort of like, is this a parody or is it real? And I'm like, well, I'm using some elements in a way that could be considered parody because I don't think this is a serious, you know, problem I'm investigating, but it does tap into some genuine emotion, you know, like, and it also, the podcast started coming out. We started season 1 coming out in January of 2020. So 2 months into the podcast, well, first of all, you have Tom Hanks as, you know, celebrity patient zero for the pandemic. You know, like he was the star of the first day of lockdown, basically. He and Rita Wilson both being the first famous people to get it in a way that made everyone go, oh shit, what's happening? In a way that made me like think, oh, do we need to stop the podcast? Like, this is like completely inappropriate to be doing this now. But very quickly, you know, in some ways it was interesting timing to do a podcast about dealing with disappointment, dealing with what do you do when you don't get what you want at a moment when everybody was feeling the same thing, which is like, oh, this isn't the way I wanted my 2020 to go. Like nobody's 2020 went according to plan. So I think it was speaking to people particularly. I mean, people still discover the podcast now and like it. It holds up. But the people who were listening to it week to week or month to month during lockdown, I think had a special connection to it because it was indirectly addressing the feeling of what are the ways that you can process disappointment? What are the ways that you can like, some of those ways make you stronger. Some of them just hurt, you know, like there's a lot of different ways that we can react to adversity, you know, and disappointment.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, and we were also being funny about it, which is also a very helpful thing, you know, when you can laugh at the, you know, disappointing experiences you've had, it does, I think, make people feel a little bit less lonely in their own, whatever they're going through, that you're like, you know, that you might be feeling disappointed about or feel like you're not getting the breaks. When you hear about another person who is, you know, not getting what they want, it makes you feel like, oh, okay, it's not just me, you know, puts things in perspective.
Yeah, on its surface, it sounds like such a narrow concept, but like the way you describe it, you clearly had a larger vision that demanded real production and distribution firepower in addition to like, you know, just these deeper conversations. How hard was it to get that kind of backing to get it off the ground?
It was hard because we did it for Earwolf. We did the pilot for Earwolf because there was a producer there, Harry Nelson, who at the time I thought was the only person who had ever really believed in the idea. And I've always talked about him that way, that like Harry was the first guy who really got it. He recently confessed to me that he was just a fan of mine from my comedy at UCP. And it wasn't so much that he believed in the idea as he just wanted to work with me, that he would have said yes, even if it had been a bad idea. So no one really believed in the idea. I was just lucky that Harry liked me. We did it for Earwolf, and they were 50-50 on it. Half the people there loved it. Half the people there hated it. And so they said, we don't want to commit to picking it up as a series, but we'll release an episode as part of Earwolf Presents. And at that point, the first episode included my conversation with John Hamm. And at that point I said, we're cutting the first episode in half because if you guys don't want it, I don't want to give you the John Hamm conversation. We'll just tease it at the end of the pilot, because I wanted to have something to shop around if they didn't want it. In the end, they didn't want it. The two things they said to me were, we don't think you have enough ideas for episodes. We don't think this concept can go more than 4 or 5 episodes, was their feeling. And my response to that was, here's 20 ideas for episodes I have just off the top of my head. And their other thing was, we don't think you're ever going to get to Tom Hanks. And I was like, I actually think that's fine if we don't ever get to Tom Hanks, because I think in order to do a podcast, the point of which is you have to figure out a way to be okay with not getting what you want. That podcast can't have some pie in the sky thing that it can't survive without. Like, that would be so foolish to do a podcast that if we don't get to Tom Hanks, it's not satisfying. Because there was a very real possibility that we wouldn't have gotten to him. But I also thought, if we make the podcast if we make it good and people like it, eventually he will want to come on the podcast, which is exactly what happened. But then there was a period of a couple months where I was just emailing podcast networks. I think Spotify was one of the only ones that actually even got back to me, because I knew a person there, and they were like, we love this pilot, but it's not right for what we're looking for. Everybody else just didn't email me back. I really didn't. It was kind of shocking to me how I had this thing that had been like, we got a good write-up in Vulture about the Earwolf Presents episode, and we had like John Hamm like queued up for the second episode. And it wasn't that I was surprised to get rejection. It was surprised that no one even bothered to respond to any of my emails. Like I don't have emails from people saying like, oh, we listened and it's not right for us. It's just silence. Just like either people didn't read it or they read it and just didn't feel like it was worth writing back to me. And eventually what happened was I ended up posting something online about like, hey, if anyone knows a podcast network, because I was basically just getting ready I was just going to do it on my phone. You know, I was just going to like put out a low fidelity thing that I would just make on my own with no support. And my friend Ben Schwartz saw it, and he had liked the pilot a lot, thought it was really good. And he was good friends with Jake and Amir at HeadGum. And he's like, do you want me to put in a word at HeadGum with Jake and Amir? And I said, please do. And he basically said to them, you know, listen to this podcast. It's really good. You guys should pick it up. And they did. And so it really was like who, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know what I would have done otherwise. I probably would still be making the podcast because I would have been just doing it on my own.
I'd still be struggling and scraping to find an audience for it because, I would have just been doing it independently. But the fortunate thing was I still had Harry, who at that point was no longer working for Earwolf. And Mike Comite was the in-house producer at HeadGum at that time. He now works for Ira Glass on Serial and This American Life. But I was very lucky because Mike was such an important part of what made the podcast sound good. He was really, he's just really smart and talented, and his brain works in ways that mine doesn't. To the point where like he and Harry both would really, there were a lot of times where I'd be like, it's fine. And they'd be like, no, it can be better. And I'd be like, let's just release it the way it is. And they would be like, no, I think we would do a cut of an episode and Mike would be so painstaking about like making sure every part of it made sense. And we'd play it to Harry and Harry would be like, it's really good. I think we can shave another 5 minutes off of it. I'd be like, why would we want to shave 5 minutes off of it? It's good as it is. Let's just be done with it. And then of course, by the third season, we brought on because it really was just the three of us making it. And then for the final season, we brought on another producer named Jordan Allen, who she really saved us in that last season. She was so smart and such a great new set of ears on it. But by that third season, we had sort of reversed personalities, and that they would be the ones saying like, let's keep it. It's like funny. Like this part's like funny and weird. And I'd be like, I think we can lose it. We don't need it. Like I was suddenly becoming the one who was like eager to cut it down viciously, ruthlessly. And they were like, no, I think we can let it play out. It's fine, But I was just very lucky that I was able to land at HeadGum, and that the three other people that I made it with were so smart and talented. And also like Jake and Amir at HeadGum, they just trusted us. Like they didn't have a single note for the podcast the entire time, to the point where most of the episodes we would finish them. Like Mike would finish them at like 2 or 3 in the morning and then put them out immediately. Like on the night that they were dropping, he would be working on it right up to the end. There was no oversight of like HeadGum nitpicking us or saying, don't do this or try to do this. Like it was such a mutually beneficial arrangement in that they like what we're doing. So they trusted us. It helped everybody because, I think, it's been a benefit to HeadGum as a network to have, I know they're very happy to be, the network that has Dead Eyes, because it's one of those podcasts that people now point to when they're pitching ideas for podcasts, where people will be like, oh, we want to do it as like a Dead Eyes kind of thing. And often what people mean by that is like an idea that seems like it could only go, 2 or 3 episodes. But if you think about the idea in an expansive enough way, you see the ability to imagine other possibilities for a certain format, and to have fun with your idea and use its limitations as a way of expanding the thing that you're making,
That's kind of like the HBO model, right? They were always known for like letting their creators create, and that's why things flocked to their network.
Yeah. And it is the way that great stuff happens. I mean, I do think that like it's not like, part of it was all of the creative part of the pushback was happening within the process of Harry and Mike and Jordan and me. We had such a healthy commitment to making it good that it wasn't like we were just recording it and putting it out without a lot of careful consideration. Because I do think there is that thing of when you have total creative freedom. This is part of the concept that I explore a lot with George Lucas. Is George Lucas's most beloved works happen during the period where he has too much pushback. He has people saying, we don't want to release American Graffiti because we don't think it's good enough, which is insane. It goes on to be one of the most successful comedies ever made. But you do get a point where no one's saying no to George Lucas creatively. And it's, as much as these things can be objective and not subjective, there is a flow to like, you get Empire Strikes Back when you still have people saying like, we think it should be like this, George. And you get Attack of the Clones when you don't have as many people saying, we don't think this should happen this way, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like, there is a healthy thing, but it's also for executives, it's so smart the smartest executives, I feel like, are the ones who know that you don't always have to note everything. That, like, I think really good, smart executives, it's not that I don't ever want notes from people, but I want good notes. I want smart notes. I want notes that feel like they're going to make a thing better. And I don't want notes from people who feel like, well, now's the time I need to say something. I need to contribute something so it looks like I had an effect on this. If that's the motivation behind the note, it's usually not a good note. As opposed to like when people who are really, I'm always very anxious about giving feedback whenever I see or read something that someone's done and they're looking for notes. I'm very wary of, you know, if you look at almost any photograph and you tell someone what's wrong with this picture, they'll then look at it and see like, oh, this is wrong and this is wrong. And you're like, actually, no, there's nothing wrong with the picture. It's just a photograph of it. But your brain will find things that are wrong if you look at almost anything. You know, you could look at the Mona Lisa and be like, there's 8 things wrong with this image. And you can find them, you know, you'd be like, oh, it does this, it does that. This looks weird, you know?
So I don't want to pry into financials, but I think people are curious about how a podcast deal like you made with HeadGum works. Like, can you talk in generalities about that structure? Like, they are obviously funding the production and figuring out distribution. And then I'm assuming you're paid to make the thing. Is there like a rev share element? How does that go down?
Yeah. I was paid a like per episode fee. And then there was a sharing of the revenue. It was not a thing that anybody got rich off of, but it did, you know, there were, you know, particularly near the end of the podcast, got a lot of downloads. And I think it also, from my experience, like a lot of the right people in terms of what would benefit me were listening to it because it was very popular within the industry. Like, it was a thing that was enough to sustain me during a period where, especially during lockdown, I didn't have anything else going on financially. But it wasn't like it wasn't anything that I'm not like rich off of it or anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's as soon as it stopped happening, it was just like any job where you're like, oh, well, now I don't have anything coming in from it, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'm not sure. I think the one thing that I had in my deal, was that HeadGum would own the IP. And I think I got them to agree to a thing that if for some reason they decided they didn't want to make any more Deadeyes, and I did, that they would have to sell it back to me or give it back to me. I think I remember saying to them, like, if we reach a point where for any reason you guys are like, we're done, we don't want to produce any more Deadeyes, I was like, please don't make me like buy back me getting fired by Tom Hanks from you. Like, don't. And they laughed about that, but I was sincere about it, where it was just like, it's a useless IP if I'm not, you know, like it's not something that, it's not like the Tonight Show or something where it's like, oh, we can just have someone else do it. You'd be better off starting off with a completely fresh thing. Even if they were like, we want to get rid of Connor and we found this other person that, you know, wants to explore similar themes or something. I was just like, realistically, that's not going to happen. It's not like, Mystery Science Theater 3000 or something where it's like, oh no, the idea can work with a different host, or, you know, I mean, it could, but it's just like, what would be the point? It feels like it's already so niche that, if I'm not doing it, you don't need the IP. It's not, the IP doesn't really have, I mean, the only scenario would be if Tom Hanks had come to them and said, I want to take it over, but you have to fire him. Then it would be really valuable IP and they would have been, but I guess I also would want to protect myself from that scenario.
But then you'd have a whole news story to build a podcast.
I mean, that would have been so much fun if that had happened. I mean, that would have been almost as good as what actually happened, you know?
So we'll get to the actual incredible conclusion, but you had so many big names and smart conversations during the show's run. Do you have a favorite episode or moment?
I mean, one of my favorite episodes is it's the end of season 2, where we actually were. It started off as just an episode where I was talking to the head writer of Band of Brothers, Eric Jenderson. And when you hear that episode, he pranks me in a way that was really devastating at the time, which was he basically says to me, he basically lays out this whole story that feels like he was giving us the answer we've been seeking. Because basically, like the podcast is trying to just explore the idea of like, did Tom Hanks really say that? Because I got it secondhand. Like Tom Hanks thinks you have dead eyes. I never heard it from his mouth. What did he say about me? Did everyone else agree? Did I really have dead eyes? Like we were trying to find my audition tape and we never were able to find anyone who had access to that audition tape. And so we're trying to like explore all of these things. And Eric Jenderson starts telling me the story about how the real Private Zelensky that the character was based on, that there was, while they were making the episode, that he found a letter or some evidence that was talking about how the character had really vibrant eyes, really lively eyes, and that he called Tom Hanks and told him, hey, whoever you get for this part, it's got to have really like lively eyes. And he's telling me this whole story, and me and my producer were just like, oh my God, we're getting the answer that we never thought we'd get. It's so specific. It's so, and then he's like, and then he basically revealed that he was just making up, like, that's the kind of thing I would write if I were writing a fictional outcome to this. And he goes, so I wanted to make you feel like you were getting this answer that you're probably never going to get. But the thing and so I was just like, oh my God, he's like, I can't believe I got like punked on my own podcast. But the thing that we actually got out of it, because we were thinking originally the episode would just be a talk with one of the head writer of Band of Brothers. That will be its own episode, the full hour. But the thing we actually got from that was like, was there really a Private Zelensky? And he said, yes. And so then we were like, oh, let's investigate who that real Private Zelensky was. And that episode has so many twists and turns in it before we arrive, because we were actually in a way that sort of nicely parallels, the fact that I was cast as Private Zelensky and then I was deemed wrong for the part. And then someone else was cast as Private Zelensky. That in that episode, Eric Jenderson sets us up with like one of his research guys who gives us a Private Zelensky who turns out to be the wrong Private Zelensky. That the more Mike looked into it, he's like, this isn't the guy. He wouldn't have been at this place at this time. And then we found another guy who was the right one. And it was such a good proof of concept of how expansive the podcast's like premise could be, because that episode to me feels like it would not be out of place as a supplement on a Band of Brothers deluxe Blu-ray. If they put that podcast episode on there, it would fit as like, oh, if you like Band of Brothers, here's this episode about the real, see that one guy in that brief walk-on part? Here's some stuff about his life that otherwise would Band of Brothers doesn't have time to go into what happened to him after the war. It doesn't, it's but that everybody has a story. And to me, because the secret sort of formula of Dead Eyes as a podcast was that comedically, it's the most narcissistic, self-involved podcast. What happened to me? I was fired from Band of Brothers. I want to know why, et cetera, et cetera. And I make everything about me, and I connect everything to Tom Hanks. And that's sort of the thing that's funny about it. But the nutrient-rich material of the podcast is about other people's stories, other people's experiences. Mm-hmm. And that episode is sort of the best example of it, because that episode is partly about me. I get pranked. I get told this story, et cetera. But most of the episode is about this real guy who fought in World War II and what happened to him after he came home. And what do we know about him? And to me, it was just so satisfying to make that episode and for people to hear that, especially people who might have approached the podcast thinking like, who's this guy? And why do we want to listen to this actor whining about how he's not on Band of Brothers? And by the time you get to episode 20, that you're actually like, oh, this is actually a story that is Band of Brothers adjacent. And I think Band of Brothers worthy in the sense that like, we're essentially doing the thing that show was doing. We're just doing it in our own peculiar way. That one's hard to top for me in terms of like, if someone was like, you know, if someone said the building is burning and you got to grab one episode, it'd be hard not to grab the Tom Hanks episode, but I'd be sorely tempted to grab because I also feel like the Real Private Zelensky episode is also the one that like I'd be proudest to have Tom Hanks listen to. I don't know which episodes of the podcast he ended up listening to, but that would be the one that I would feel like he would look at that and go, yeah, I'm on board with this. This is something, you know? And so much of it, like that's one of the episodes that producer Mike Comite is actually in the episode, because at a certain point he'd done so much work that I was like, it would be really bad for me to be the voice of all this research as if I did this. Like, you have to be in this episode because for all the work you do in every episode, you've gone above and beyond in making this one a special episode. And we need to hear your voice talking about it.
So in season 3, you have Colin Hanks on, and he tells you that Tom is aware of the podcast. Did you have any inkling before that or suspicion that was the case?
I did. But it was interesting because early on, I had an interaction online with Truman Hanks, one of Tom's other kids. So I knew that he was into the podcast, but it was very early days. So I knew that it had made it into the Hanks family, but I also wasn't in that big a hurry to get to Tom Hanks because there were a lot of things I wanted to explore. And I also wanted to make sure that like we had established ourselves. We didn't really start trying to get to Tom Hanks until season 3. And, you know, we were trying a little bit during season 2, but I was sort of the one who was sort of like, we have time, we can do this eventually. And I didn't want to just like, Truman reached out to me and we had this very friendly interaction and he was clearly enjoying the podcast. And I was like, I don't want to ask because I feel like the podcast asks explicitly. So if he's listening to the podcast, he knows I want to talk to his dad. If that's on the table, he'll tell me. I don't need to be, I don't want to push it, because also getting him on the podcast that way, there's just a higher degree of probability that it won't be a good episode because it's sort of been set up the wrong way. So Colin Hanks, I got to him through Paul Scheer, who's someone I didn't know prior to doing the podcast, who became a fan of the podcast. And then at one point I knew he was like friendly with him. And I was like, would you pass along a letter to Colin asking him if he'll be on the podcast? And even in that, I was like, I wanted to talk to Colin about Colin stuff. I wanted to limit the amount of stuff where it's me just asking questions about his dad, because there's so much that's interesting about Colin and Colin's career and his point of view. It's actually interesting. So we weren't, because it's the same thing where I'm like, Colin knows what we want. He'll offer it if that's on the table. I don't need to be like, hey, could you ask your dad to be on the podcast? I don't need to push that button, because again, that'll happen if it's meant to happen. We weren't being like coy about it. It's just like, you don't need to like push too hard. And the funny thing was, Colin Hanks was supposed to be the season 3 finale, because we were like, that's a really good closer. We end with a Hanks. We have a Hanks on the show. What a great way to close out the season. And season 3 was designed to lure Tom Hanks, to get him interested in, like, if he hasn't been interested up to now, the first episode was all about how do you attract him, you know, and it was like, how do you get his, and I talked to Starlee Kine about, who'd done mystery show about how you achieve these like podcast goals, you know, because she had done that podcast where she was solving these like seemingly impossible mysteries and she would get it done. You know, she would like get results. And then one of the episodes another one that I'm really proud of because it's such a deep, weird dive is the episode about Tom Hanks's Electric City, which is the animated TV show that Tom Hanks created. Like that's his name in the title, like Walt Disney's Fantasia is Tom Hanks's Electric City. And it's this dystopian sci-fi drama that premiered on Yahoo Screen for those with long enough memory, digital memories to remember the brief window where Yahoo Screen was this streaming service that had like shows by Paul Feig and, had like some really, and like a full season of Community was Yahoo Screen, and Tom Hanks's Electric City premiered and died on that digital platform. And we did this whole episode that was about this show. And that episode was entirely done out of a motivation that it's like, maybe this will get Tom Hanks's attention. And the funny thing was, we had the whole season basically mapped out. All of the interviews, basically, except for one, had been recorded. We were just in the process of assembling it when I suddenly get an email on a random Tuesday from Tom Hanks. And it was such a baffling email because I won't say too many specifics. I don't want to put in identifiers, but it was just one of those things where it was like, almost like receiving a weird puzzle in the mail. Cause I'm like, this is an email that appears to be from Tom Hanks, but could be someone pranking me. But why would someone pranking me do this, this, and this in the email? Why would this be their email signature, etc.? And it was just Tom Hanks offering to be on the podcast, saying I'd be honored to be on your podcast. And we very quickly did a little investigation, figured out it was real. We responded. And then before I know it, Tom Hanks and I are emailing back and forth, scheduling a recording session. This is a month before season 3 starts coming out. I'm immediately like, what are we going to do? Our whole season is about luring Tom Hanks to do the podcast. And now won't this ruin it? And they're like, it won't ruin it because we've already recorded that stuff. But then we had to do all this restructuring because it now didn't work to have Colin Hanks be the end of the season. We couldn't even have him be the penultimate episode because it sort of would have taken away what was special about getting Colin on the podcast. Because it would have been like, hey, we have Colin and now we have Tom. It just would have been like, so we're like, we got to move that to like the middle of the season and sincerely sort of throw people off the scent, because when we ended the Colin one, he sort of had a message for us, which was be prepared not to ever get the answers that you want. And we didn't know if what he was saying to us was, he doesn't remember what happened, so you're not going to get closure even if you talk to my dad. Or was he saying, I am here as a representative of the Hanks family telling you this is as far into the building as you're going to get. Because I genuinely thought that could have been what he was saying, which is like, it's like, I've been sent down to have a word with you saying, we're cool with you, but like, this is as far as you're getting. And so we were able to have that episode be like, not a misdirect, but like take the feeling of like, oh, maybe we're not on the one hand we're close, but maybe this is as far as we get. And I love that we were able to do like the run of episodes after Colin Hanks, where it truly does feel like, oh, they're not going to get anywhere close to him, like they're just going to like play this out and it's going to go where it goes, but we're no longer like hunting in that way.
And then we were able to keep that episode a secret while we, released all of season 3 and have it be a thing where people found out the week before the episode, because we wanted it to be like a fun week, but not too enough build up where people have a week to look forward to it, but not so much build up that it's a letdown, because that's always the thing you have to balance.
Oh yeah. In the finale that Hanks appears in, I describe his demeanor as fully engaged and Hanksian, but he's also kind of mortified at his behavior and what you might talk about. What did you expect going in, and how did that kind of compare to reality?
We didn't know, because we also we had 45 minutes scheduled with him, I think. But there was the part of us that were like, we got to get this stuff out of the way up top, because what if he gets a call 20 minutes in that he has to go and that's all we have? So there was the concern about that. The great thing was he basically ended up staying for an hour and a half, which when you're Tom Hanks, you don't stay an extra 45 minutes unless you're enjoying the experience. Like that meant a lot to me, the fact that he stayed as long as he did. I think he was really honest with me, and he brought, he's one of the all-time great talk show guests, but that's also a professional skill. That is like in the same way that like when he's on Saturday Night Live, he knows the name of every member of the crew, which is a skill I don't have, but it is a professional skill. If you are good at that, it's like juggling. It's like, it's like, being good at math. It's just like, that is a skill. It requires either a tremendous gift or a lot of work. And so one of the biggest risks would be, you don't know what you're going to get exactly. I assumed we weren't going to get him coming in and being like angry or upset with me, but I thought there was the possibility that like there could be a charm offensive that would maybe not make for the best episode. He came in and fully understood the assignment, in the sense of he was really engaged, really open. There's a part that I didn't even know if we were going to have time to get around to, which was like a callback to a first season episode, which had to do with the fact that one of the things that had sort of haunted me was that when I did my re-audition, I had just made that movie where I played Ryan Johnson. And I had worked with an actor named Holmes Osborne, who is a good friend and colleague of Tom Hanks's. They came up together in their early days acting. And almost every time Tom Hanks has directed something, he has cast Holmes Osborne in a part. Holmes Osborne is a great actor, and he plays the dad in That Thing You Do, the one who owns the hardware store, and is in a ton of great movies. He's in Affliction, he's in Election. He's a great guy and great actor. I've always wondered in the room if I had said, oh, by the way, Holmes Osborne says hello. I just worked with him on a little movie. Would that have moved the needle at all for me? I mentioned the name Holmes Osborne to Tom Hanks, and he lit up. You can hear it on the episode. He immediately says, oh, Holmes, oh my God. He's just like immediately, oh. And he says, 100%, if you had said you knew Holmes, you would not have been fired.
Oh.
And now the thing is, I've had people ask me, like, how does that make you feel? Does that make you wish you'd done it? No, because the podcast has actually been a better experience than if I had fully, done my couple of lines in Band of Brothers. I would have eventually arrived at a similar moment of struggle and disappointment that probably would have broken me in a less interesting way. I think I still would have gone through the same arc of figuring out how to deal with being an actor who, you spend all your time being rejected. You spend most of your time being disappointed. Even when you're not rejected, a lot of times the actual experience is not everything that you dream it would be, even when things are going well, there's just so many ways in which you feel like, I'm not doing good enough, or, that didn't turn out as well as I'd liked, or, oh, that was great, but nobody saw it, or, and the moment of Tom Hanks being honest with me and telling me I wouldn't have been fired if I'd said that
it's such, I kind of am surprised that more people didn't sort of like, to me, that was the most exciting part of the conversation, because someone in show business being honest about the way that show business works. I mean, Dead Eyes is on HeadGum because Ben Schwartz thought it was good and he knows Jake and Amir. Like, that's a lucky break for me that I know this person and they know, he knows those people. And if I'd been, brave enough or desperate enough to throw out Holmes's name in the room that day, guess what? I wouldn't have been fired. I would have been directed by Tom Hanks in an episode of Band of Brothers. It's just a true thing. And I really appreciated that he didn't try to like equivocate or contextualize it or apologize for it, because obviously, like, it makes a difference. If you're like, I don't know this kid. Oh, you worked with someone whose judgment I respect? Well, that's good enough. He's fine. He can do it. Like, life isn't fair, and the industry has all these variables and X factors and things like that. I also really appreciated, one of the most fun things about the Tom Hanks episode is you get to the point where I told him the story of how the actor who replaced me, who I later found out there was a room full of replacement actors there that day when I was doing my re-audition. That's one of the things I uncover in the podcast. And the actor who ended up getting the part went to the bathroom before his audition. And Tom Hanks came in and used the bathroom at the same time. And he didn't say anything. He just was quiet, washed his hands, left, went back to the other room. And then when Adam Sims, the actor who replaced me, when he came in for his audition, Tom Hanks says, "Hey, I remember you from the bathroom." And which is a very perfectly funny Tom Hanks thing to say. But I had sort of presented this idea that the real audition was the bathroom audition. It was like almost like an unplanned test, which is like, there's a million ways you could make a bad impression in a bathroom just by making an awkward joke or being weird, or, there's so many ways other than just like, I'm not going to say anything, even though it's Tom Hanks, one of the most important actors in the world, but I'm not going to take this moment to make a risky joke or something. And instead, you allow for the possibility for Tom Hanks to make a non-risky, perfectly appropriate joke when this actor walks into the room. So I had shared this with Tom Hanks in the interview, and then Tom Hanks did the thing which almost every previous guest had done, which is almost like playing the home game version of Dead Eyes, which is like, what if this or what if that? And Tom Hanks starts saying, he comes to this conclusion, which is, he goes, you potentially lost the job. You lost the job that you could have saved if you'd said something in a moment of uncertainty. He got the job by not saying something in a moment of uncertainty, which means there is no foolproof lesson that we can draw from this. Like, the lesson isn't, you should have mentioned Holmes Osborne, because what if I'd said the wrong thing? What if I'd said it in the wrong way? What if there's still that uncertainty. There's still, you can't know. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's Tom Hanks playing the Dead Eyes game as if he isn't the central character. This is like when an athlete plays their video game. You know what I mean? Where it's like they play the game in which they are a character,
So at the conclusion of that, it's mentioned that Hanks and his people will keep you in mind for future opportunities. Have you heard from him at all since then?
I am in the audiobook of Tom Hanks's novel, which came out a couple years ago. He wrote a book. He's published fiction before, stories and things. But his first novel is called The Making of Another Major Motion Picture Masterpiece. And it is a fictionalized account of the making of essentially a Marvel movie. It's not called Marvel in the book. It's as if there's another company, but it is about the making of a big tentpole comic book movie. And he basically puts in he draws from his entire career's worth of experience making movies to tell this story. And the heroes of the story, like he's probably, if he is a part in the book, it's probably the director role. The heroes of the novel are the first AD and a production assistant who is hired, who was a driver on the movie, who ends up getting bumped up to being a production assistant on the film. And it's about all the people who work on a movie who solve the millions of little problems, like we need a bucket of ice and a whip. And there is a character in the novel who is an actor who is fired. And one of the descriptions of that actor was that this actor has dark eyes. And then there is another character who is an actor in a small role on the movie who is then promoted to being the lead in the movie. And I am the voice of that actor in the audiobook of Tom Hanks's novel. So basically, the first real opportunity that Tom Hanks had to cast me in something, and he did. And it was not lost on any member of the Dead Eyes production team that his make good still did not involve my eyes being seen on camera. It's still an audio only format. Although he did confirm, it's funny because the joke that people always make, which is, at a certain point, I guess it's a blessing and a curse to have like a joke that everybody makes about you. But I almost can't post anything without someone making it like, oh, this guy looks like he has dead eyes. And it's always a way of like, every now and then I know like whether someone is fully up to speed, because Tom Hanks does officially declare in that episode that I do not have dead eyes, either in the present or in my headshot from the time which he was looking at. And he's been great to me. He's been really nice. He's sent me really nice a couple of letters, and has said like, we're not through, like this isn't over, we're gonna work together again. So I'm hopeful for when those stars will align at some point. But even if it's just the audiobook, I mean the book itself, but obviously I'm partial to the audio version since I'm in the cast with both. It's got a great cast of actors like Tom and Rita Wilson and Ego Modem, and just like so many good people in the cast. And it is, for people who've listened to all of Dead Eyes, there's two things I would point them to that you might not have known. One is the audiobook, which you can find on Spotify or Audible or anywhere that it's out there, where you get to hear me and Tom Hanks in the same work. And the other is on YouTube, there's a Dead Eyes Live at Dynasty Typewriter, which is kind of an epilogue to episode 31. Because it has a little bit of content that's not part of the podcast arc. But I do feel like Tom's book is in conversation with the podcast. If you liked the podcast, the book is really fascinating because it covers a lot of the same thematic territory in terms of like show business is tricky and life is tricky and things don't go according to plan. And I always recommend it to people. If you're like, oh, if you like Dead Eyes and you really are invested in this thing, you should check out Tom's novel, because if this is my way of processing it, that book is Tom's way of processing his whole career. Including my tiny little part in it, because I'm sure it's no coincidence. I haven't talked to him about it directly. I'm sure it's no coincidence that an actor's fired and that they have dark eyes. I'm sure that in the writing process, the looming existence of this podcast and its narrative had a little effect.
I just added it to my Audible cart. Gonna use a credit on that one.
It's well worth the credit. It's good use of the credit.
All right, let's get to our dumb internet questions we ask every guest. Tab check, Connor. Right now, how many tabs do you have open on your browser of choice?
I have 35 tabs open right now. A lot of them
impressive, is it?
Could be easily closed. And this is after I had a lot more than that. I closed a bunch last week. Things that were like, oh, I've got like my Gmail open like 10 times here at various points.
What do you think the typical number is?
I think it's probably between 20 and 100.
Okay.
Like on my browser, on my cell phone, I have 99 tabs open, and I have to be very careful. I usually try to keep it around 93 to 95, because if I go to a website, like before when I went to click the link to record this podcast, it opened another browser window, and I had to be like, oh shit, I got to close something or else I'm going to lose one of the old tabs.
Right. All right. When you open your social media apps, what are the algorithms feeding you right now?
A lot of times, at the moment, it's mostly fun stuff because I've sort of been avoiding a lot of political stuff recently, or keeping it separate from the social media I use. The stuff that they tend to know about is I get a lot of t-shirt ads for specific t-shirt things that know exactly what I would want. Like, they know that it's like, oh, there's a Wild at Heart David Lynch t-shirt. You'll probably buy this. Or, oh, there's a Bullwinkle and Rocky shirt. You'll buy this. Like, the t-shirt algorithms, like, they know how to like get to me in a way that is both useful and upsetting.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game. I have so many unworn shirts in my closet just because they got me with the Instagram ads.
Yeah, that you would be like, oh, they're making a t-shirt of like Duel, Steven Spielberg's first feature. And it's going to be only on sale till Monday. So it's like the algorithms know to sell me niche t-shirts that will only be available for 72 hours. Because they know what I'll feel like when there was like a really cool Severance shirt that I didn't see the ad for it until it was no longer for sale. And that feeling stays with you because you're kind of like, I don't even know if I would have bought it, but now I don't even have a choice. And that makes you more vulnerable to the ones that you are targeted for during the window of opportunity.
Favorite accounts to follow on social media?
At the moment, the one that comes to mind is called Filming in McDonald Land. And it's someone who, it's mostly like vintage, like 1970s McDonald's commercial, like behind the scenes on commercials. At the moment, they're getting ready to do like they're moving, and this person has all this like old McDonald's stuff that they're going to be like auctioning off. I also am, I kind of get addicted to stuff like that, like auction websites that are selling like stuff I cannot afford, but I want to like look at the listings. Kind of do that in the way other people do with like Zillow, where they look at houses that they're not going to ever live in, but they're like, oh, look at this. Interesting. And like last week, there was like a Simpsons animation art auction where you tease yourself with the opening bid being like, oh, it's not that much. And then you go back later and you're like, oh, it went for like $6,000. I wouldn't even have looked at it, you know?
What is a corner of the internet people might be surprised you're interested in?
I struggled with this one because I feel like if anybody knows me, I don't know that there's anything that would be a surprise. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that any of my interests are surprising once anyone's known me for like 5 minutes. I guess like recently I've sort of, I mean, this isn't surprising at all. Like every example I think of, I'm like, that's not surprising. It's just so typical. Like I've been looking for shows on YouTube that are never going to come out on streaming. Like I was just watching the show Big Apple, which was a David Milch follow-up to NYPD Blue that ran for like 12 episodes. It starred Ed O'Neill from Married with Children. And it's, and Michael Madsen is in it, and Kim Dickens, a lot of like Deadwood people are in it. Titus Welliver, and I'll just watch the run of it on YouTube because it's like whoever owns this, it's not enough episodes that they're ever gonna. It's also not anything that was popular enough that anyone's gonna like. I don't think it's even gonna show up on like Tubi or something. So I've been like looking for like what shows are just on YouTube because somebody uploaded them. But again, that's not surprising for me. Like I feel like I don't have any surprising obsessions.
A very predictable man.
Yeah.
What is the last thing that made you truly laugh online?
I'm trying to think. It was probably an animal thing. Let me think what it would have been. I'm actually going to look if is that not cheating? Is that cheating if I look and see what's something that because that's the thing. A lot of the stuff just like goes into like a memory hole where if you're not actually looking at it.
I love that it made such an impression on you that you're researching it.
Oh, I know. So here's something that made me laugh that it was on purpose thing, which is a guy, Patrick Noth, has been doing this caveman character called Grok, Grak. And he was doing these videos where he's like dressed as a caveman and he's commenting on videos of other people, like cooking videos. And a lot of it's him going, meat, wow, meat, oh, woman and meat. And it'll be like a woman cooking some meat or something. Wow, where's meat? Like whenever there isn't a shot of meat on screen, he's wondering where the meat went. And I just started watching these, and Patrick's someone who's always really made me laugh. He's just a really funny guy. And these videos were making me laugh. That's probably the most recent thing.
I just pulled it up. I'm so enticed to click on all of these thumbnails. I'll do that later.
It seems like it's one of those things where it seems like such a simple idea that you would see it and get it and that'd be it. But I found that the simpler it was, the more I kind of felt compelled to watch each one, because he's smart enough that like there are tiny variations, even though part of the joke is how limited this caveman character is. But he's not limited. So you kind of have that thing of when a really smart comedian does a really simple, or it's like that smart, stupid thing of like a smart person will know how to play a stupid character in a way that is really satisfying. And I shouldn't say stupid. I just mean the caveman is limited. He's limited, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get to the dark side. What was your most scarring internet moment, if you want to disclose it?
I don't know if this was the most scarring moment, but it was the thing that I thought of for this, which was in the early days of the internet, there was a thing called the Poetry Forum that was basically like a message board about poetry. And me and a friend of mine started sort of posting back and forth as these like poetry, we'd create characters on this forum and we'd post poems, and we'd get into fights with each other as these characters on the forum. And I was in a fight with one of his characters, and it was going for weeks, this back and forth. And I was playing a character. I called myself Sam the Shark. And this person like attacked one of my poems, and I started getting back and forth into it, thinking that I was in a fight with my friend. And at one point, this person, this character said something. I remember the phrase where they're like, I'm not one causing the fight. I am just a girl of fun on a poetry forum. And I was like, oh man, he pivoted in a way that like, now I'm like fighting with this like young girl on the internet. It made me look like I was the bully on there. And at a certain point I talked to him, and he hadn't been on the poetry forum in months. And I somehow had thought I was in a fake fight with my real friend as a character, but I was maybe in a real fight with a total stranger, thinking that I was fighting with a character in character. And I think that
devastating.
It really was one of those things where I felt so foolish that I was like, oh man, like I've been mean in ways I wouldn't have been, because I thought we were just like two people who knew each other doing characters. And in fact, I was in what turned out to be a real argument with a stranger.
Were you at least winning the argument?
I don't know. I don't even remember at this point. It was so ridiculous because the whole point of it was this was like a gentle place where people weren't fighting. They were just posting their poems. And then we would be these two people that would be like getting really angry at each other, and no one else was really engaging. So that's why I was even more convinced that it was just me and my friend. The fact that I somehow had found one other person who was willing to fight that hard within the context of the poetry forum. Back when the internet was small enough that something could just be called the poetry forum and it would be the thing that existed as the one like poetry forum on the internet.
Yeah, take me back. How do you pry yourself away from devices or log off? Do you have any special tactics?
It's interesting because like some answers like go for a walk doesn't work because everything's portable. Going for a walk is often where I'm the most online because I'm listening to stuff or I'm looking at stuff while I'm walking around. I try to like doing stuff with other people in person. That's a big one. Also physical media, and by physical media, I'll include like going to the movies. Like, even though I remember at one point, there was a movie theater that it's closed now, but after pandemic, when movie theaters were opening up, they had a pre-show thing that was sort of shaming the audience for don't use devices in here, which is, they weren't wrong to be, people should not be on their devices in movie theaters. That's 100%. But the way they were doing it was so weird because you can just tell people like, this is not the place for your phone or your tablet or your device. We're coming here to look at this. But they were sort of phrasing this video made it like, how pathetic to be stuck on your screen. Come here and everyone look at one big screen. And I remember just thinking like, it doesn't work if the thing you're shaming is looking at a screen, because you're just saying like, pay money to all look at one screen at once. Fundamentally, if aliens came here, they wouldn't see that big a difference between a little screen or one big screen that we all look at. But I do find that like physical, like watching something that's either on television or like a Blu-ray or reading a book or actually listening to like a record, like there are times when I like, it helps me break out of checking my phone. If I just decide I'm going to focus on this movie, like watching like subtitled films is a great way to make sure that you don't, because there are some movies that it's just too easy to be on your phone. If you're at home and there's just some movie on Netflix, it's easy to just keep checking your phone and you don't get the experience of that movie. So like, get the Criterion channel, subscribe to that and watch some Kurosawa movies. That is one way to like, if you get into that, it is very hard to enjoy and appreciate a Kurosawa film while checking your phone. So it's a good way of breaking off, I think, if you can get into some stuff that makes you have to get off the phone.
Do you still physically like put your phone in a different room, or do you have the restraint because the content's so engaging?
I don't put it in a different room, but I do put it down. Like that, even just like putting it down. Sometimes if you can charge it in an inconvenient place, that's another good trick. If you can buy yourself a charging cord that's a little too small, so your only option is to like sit by the outlet or do something else.
I like that. Where would you be without the internet?
I would be browsing more brick and mortar stores. I do miss a lot of that because I feel like when I moved to New York City, one of my favorite things was just to go into bookstores and record stores. And there's still some, but not as many. And boy, do I miss like Virgin Megastore in Union Square. Like when I first moved to New York, I was there almost every day, whether I bought something or not. I would go around, I'd look at the sales, I'd look at, what was new. Well, I was bad at it in the sense that sometimes I would waste a long time. I was really bad at video rental stores, because I would sometimes go in and browse for an hour and then walk out having not rented something. But that is where I'd be. I do that less than I used to, and I miss it. I like the experience of discovering stuff that way. It's much harder to discover stuff that you like. I mean, in some ways, I shouldn't say that. It's not that it's harder. It's just different because there's things that I'm not someone who complains about. It's just so different. We live in the on-demand world and the instant gratification world. There's so many things about it that I think about when I was a kid growing up and we had Saturday morning cartoons. which meant that on Saturday morning, it was the one time of the week when you could watch cartoons. And maybe a little bit after school, there'd be a couple things, but sometimes, you'd get home from school at 4:00 and you'd have an hour until like Jeopardy started. And once Jeopardy started, it was adult time. That was it. And I didn't have cable. It was sort of before cable was as widespread a thing. And certainly cable wasn't even what it was by that point yet. Saturday morning cartoons were this sacred time. But if you went back to, and I feel like I got so much. I mean, I can remember in the autumn when there'd be a primetime special on like CBS on Friday night that would be like, here's all the new cartoon shows that are going to starting tomorrow. And it would be like, here's a new, a clip from Muppet Babies. That's a new show that you're going to get to start watching tomorrow. And just how special it felt and how exciting it was. Now, if you went back and told, 9-year-old me, will you trade Saturday morning cartoons for the ability to watch basically anything you want, anytime you want? There is no doubt in my mind I'd take that deal in a heartbeat. Because it's better. I would have been like, I could go anywhere I want online and find what I need to watch right now. I don't have to wait. I don't have to get up at 7 a.m. I usually get up at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday mornings. The cartoons didn't start until 7 because my local station would show something. It would go literally from the test pattern to the national anthem. Good morning, welcome to KUMU TV Channel 8, KRCG TV 13, whatever it was. And then they would show Rocky and Bullwinkle from the 1960s or Underdog from the 1960s. They would show these old cartoons that they had a cheap syndicated package of. And I had to get up hours earlier than I wanted to experience this. 9-year-old me would have said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to have a device that I can watch all of them in order. I can binge them. I can do whatever. So I'm not someone who says, oh, it was better way back when. I am glad in retroactively for the way things were, but I don't argue that it was better because I know what I would choose. I know what's more satisfying, even though there are downsides to that. Certainly, I think we all are a little bit crazy because of what unlimited choice has done to us. I think it's broken show business wide open in a way that is irreparable in some ways. Like it's made some things so much easier. Like you and I, if we wanted to have this conversation in the 1970s, it couldn't be this long. And you would have had to work at a radio station. You'd have to have, or we'd be on ham radio or something like. Right. The fact that our conversation is going to, like, people in Europe can play this, and it doesn't cost you any more than it's not like you pay an extra thing so your podcast can be available all over the world. It just is. But that also means it's true of everybody else. And so what a trade-off that is, which is like, we get to do this and people will hear it, but it's also like everything spread so thin now. Everything that you make is like, there's times when I discover that like a major film exists and I'm like, how did I not hear about this? And it's like, well, because everything's happening all the time now, like it's not like we're all waiting for this week's thing to happen.
Do you think, whether we knew it or not, that those limitations created more appreciation? Like you had to browse what was in the store. You had to watch what was on TV. Now there's just too much choice.
I think there's undeniably too much choice. And I say too much just in the sense that like there's more than any person could possibly process. You can't even come close.
Right.
And so like, even when when something like Oppenheimer and Barbie happens, it's kind of magical because it's so hard to make a moment like that happen where we all agree to be aware of something and appreciate it. That what's more likely to happen is that, you'll have something will come out and it'll either find its audience or it won't. But even when it finds its audience, it just it sinks into the same, like, it's so, on the one hand, like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't go back. It was inevitable that this was going to happen. And it's not like there was one ideal moment, because the opportunity to do things is there in a way that it wasn't before. But it also means that every opportunity is a little bit less valuable. It's almost like a currency being devalued, which is like, oh, we're printing more money, but the money's worth less. And that's kind of the way everything is culturally, which is that there's more of it, but good luck getting it out there. And but there's also the question of how much is enough, because if there are still the opportunity, there's maybe not the opportunity to be the Beatles in the way that there might have been at some point. Like, even people who were huge and successful in terms of raw numbers, the percentage of the pie is smaller, if that makes sense. Like, you can have literally the same size audience the Beatles had, but there's just more people now. So you're not going to get the same, like, share. There's going to be more people now who are like, who? Than there would have been for the Beatles. Everybody, whether you like them or not, knew about the Beatles in a way that, like, that's just harder to reach now. I find it hard to think about it as fully good or bad, because there's more opportunities for people to do things. And if you can find an audience that sustains you on either a money level, you can find 1,000 people who really love what you do. That can be enough to keep you doing the thing you're doing. And it's not enough to sustain a network TV show, but also the network TV shows, what used to be a cancelable number of viewers is now a hit show. Everybody's having to make do with this. So it's sort of like, it sort of depends on what your goals are, because if your goal is to be the most popular thing in the world, that's harder to do now than ever before. But if your goal is to do the thing you want to do and find an audience for it, you actually have more opportunities to actually make the thing, and more opportunities to get some people to see it. If you wanted people to see your movie in the 1970s, you had to have it play in something. You had to get some theater to agree to play it. You can make a movie right now, put it online, and anybody can see it. The question is, like, will anybody ever see it? You can put a movie online and literally nobody sees it,
Well, let's say that abundance problem is semi-solved and the internet just goes away. What is the one thing that you would save?
It's a hard question. At the moment, I just think about the Internet Archive, because I feel like if everything else went away, but there was still just the Internet Archive, it's a place, it's a library, but it's also a garage sale. It's not a, I'm hoping, because I think they're in a little bit of trouble. To me, they feel like such an invaluable resource. And it feels like there's so much stuff on there that is there because somebody thought, let's preserve this, as opposed to everything else, which is sort of like, this is here because we've monetized it and we think it can be, the last week they took all the Looney Tunes off of Max. What was HBO Max? Mm-hmm. Because I guess Warner Brothers has decided, like, there's just no point in keeping them up, or they can't figure out a way to make money off of them being there. And they don't think that they're an important part of their company's history or legacy. And the reason that they gave was, we're focusing less on children's programming, as if that's all those films are, and they're not, like, significant part of cinema history. Like, these are movies that have literally inspired people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas to make movies that change the way movies are. So, like, these are not small things. And currently you can find those Looney Tunes on the Internet Archive, and, they might get pulled down, but the they're interested in actually preserving something. I mean, let's be honest, like Warner Brothers has made enough money off of Bugs Bunny. Like they don't need to make another dime off Bugs Bunny. They can come up with something new and make money. The cultural, historical importance of Bugs Bunny is as, if not more important than whether anyone ever makes another dime off that character that's almost a century old, you know? I mean, we're like 6 years away from, I think, Porky Pig, the first incarnation of Porky Pig being public domain. So like these are about to belong to people anyway, to some extent.
Kind of feels like cheating, but I get where you're going.
What's a better answer? Should it be smaller? Is it cheating because it's too big?
It's up to you. I mean, it's your answer. Some people just pick like a random viral video. Some people are like my recipe sites, stuff like that.
Yeah, let's say that person's recipe sites, whoever that was.
So what else is going on? What else do you want? Anything you want to promote that people should check out to keep up with the latest with Connor?
Yeah, I've been doing for the past year, I've been doing this solo show called Connor Ratliff Presents the Acting Class, which is an improvised one-person show that pretends to be a real acting class. And for people who like Deadeyes, it sort of is adjacent to that in that I'm not playing like a character version of myself. I'm trying to actually be myself in this show. And the show is sort of a mix of crowd work and improvised scene work because I will talk to members of the audience who are both actors and non-actors about acting or their thoughts on acting or their experiences with it. And then I will demonstrate what acting truly is. And it sort of blends my sort of Deadeyes, that part of my career with the UCB improv half of my career. And I just recently started, I'm touring around with it. I do it every month in New York City. But I just started a YouTube channel where the first 13 full shows are up. So if you go to YouTube and you look up Connor Ratliff Presents the Acting Class, you'll find the channel for it. Please subscribe to that if you can.
Absolutely. I'm going to subscribe right now.
Great. And I'm hoping that's the thing I'm going to be doing for the rest of my career because I have some plans for expanding it and kind of want to like spend the next year or so finding places that I can bring the show that maybe if I find some places that like it, I can come back once a year and do the show in those places, you know?
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Connor, for this discussion and for your hilarious contributions to the internet. This is Ryan Perry saying log off. The internet will still be there when you get back.